Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our Alliance Expert Talk webinar. We're very glad to have you all here. I see people are still coming in, which is amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Sofia Cortez. I'm the coordinator of the International Alliance Against Health Risk in Wildlife Trade. As many of you already know, the Alliance is a global interdisciplinary network of over 180 organizations and more than 600 people working to prevent pathogen spillover in the science policy, within the science policy and practice interface. And the Alliance also acts as a platform for knowledge exchange and sharing across its network and beyond. And that's why we have this expert talk webinar, which is one of the activities that we organize regularly to support this goal, where we invite experts in their field to share evidence-based knowledge related to health risk and wildlife trade. So before introducing our expert of today's webinar, I just want to remind you that this webinar is held in English, but we have simultaneous interpretation in French and Spanish. If you want to activate it, at the bottom you have the option of more, and you can click on it, and then we have like a globe figure that says interpretation. So you can click on it and activate if you need it, translation in French or in Spanish. Also, we'll have a presentation from our expert, and this will be, and afterwards we will have a QA session where you're all welcome to ask any questions or share any reflections or comments. So please, if you have questions, we kindly ask you to write them in the QA section here in Zoom. And if you have any IT difficulties, please write in the chat, and my colleagues will help you, will guide you on how to solve it. So, welcome again. And yeah, today we are very excited to have Dr. Jérôme Gippet as our expert of today's webinar. Dr. Gippet is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Fribourg, Switzerland. His background is in invasion biology, and he's also trained as urban ecologist at the University of Lyon. He has previously worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Lausanne, where he investigated emerging exotic pet markets. And today he will present a study recently published in Science journal on how wildlife trade shape animal to human pathogen transmission over 40 years. He is the lead author of this study, and we are very grateful and happy that he kindly accepted to share the main insights of this study with all of us. So now, thank you, Jérôme. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Sophia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, first, thank you for hosting me, allowing me to talk about this work. And thank you for everyone that's here. I'm gonna start, like in old movies, by credits, if I manage to change slide. Yeah, okay, perfect. And so the work I'm going to present is the result of a team effort, of course, and it involves myself, but also Colin Carlson from Yale University and colleagues from the University of Lausanne, where I was previously working. So Tristan Klaffenberger, Matteo Schweizer, Cleo Bertelsmeyer, the senior author on this work, and also two other US American researchers from the University of Idaho and Maryland, Evan Eskew and Meredith Gore. I also need to thank Sven Bacher, that is my current employer at the University of Fribourg and that supported this work, although not by directly being involved in the paper. So initially, I was planning to present a bit more about who I am and Colin Carlson also because he was supposed to come for a question and answers, but he's sorry he won't be able to join. Still, just to give a bit of background from where this study came from, I'm initially an invasion biologist and I came to study the wildlife trade from this perspective, so this consequence of the wildlife trade. And Colin is an epidemiologist working on the link between climate change and disease ecology and pandemic preparedness. Okay, just so we're all on the same page, I'm gonna talk a bit about what I mean by wildlife trade. It means a lot of things like wild animal are traded inside countries, but also internationally for many reasons. It goes from meat consumption to exotic pets, but can also be for biomedical research as hunting trophy for the fur fashion or for traditional medicine, and that's only some big reasons for which animals are traded. There's plenty of others. This is not an anecdotal trade. It's totally globalized, involves like billions of US dollar annually, just for the legal part. Uh, it also involves thousands and thousands of different animal and plant species. This is just the last 20 years of import into the US, according to recent papers, and billions of animals. Again, these numbers, billions of individuals, these numbers are just the last 20 years of US imports. The main consequence, the main documented and I think discussed consequence of wildlife trade is species extinction by the overexploitation of natural populations. It's been the center of most regulation, international regulation of the wildlife trade, but in reality, wildlife trade has at least four big consequences. So beyond species extinction, there's also the introduction of species outside of their natural range that leads to biological invasions, but also concerned about animal welfare. And finally, it is also linked to disease outbreaks. Of course, these four consequences were not independent from each other. And for example, invasive species can spread diseases, animal welfare can increase risk for disease outbreaks, etc., etc. I will talk a bit more about the importance of this consideration at the end of the talk. But now we will focus on disease outbreak risk. So this one consequences of the wildlife trade. So it's not a news that wildlife trade is linked to disease transmission and disease pathogen outbreaks, but it's been under like strongest scrutiny since COVID. And in the recent years, there's been several very good reports that have shown that traded species were hosting human transmissible pathogens. I will call this pathogen zoonotic pathogen afterwards. And when I will talk about zoonotic host species, it will be animal species that can carry pathogens that are transmissible to humans. We even have like very concrete example of how wildlife trade can lead to transmission of pathogen from wild animal to humans. Here with 2003 Mpox outbreak in the US, for example. But when you come from that observation that, okay, trade animals carry zoonotic pathogen, the next question for me is like, are they hosting more zoonotic pathogen than non-traded animals? Should we be particularly concerned by these animals compared to those that are not traded? And why would traded animals carry more zoonotic pathogens than non-traded animals. And the idea is quite simple. It's all about contact because wildlife trade generates close and repeated contact between wild animals and humans. And each of these contact is an opportunity for a pathogen to jump from animals to humans. And so, although we know that trade animals carry zoonotic pathogen, we don't know if it makes them. We don't until now we had no data whether it would make them more likely to share pathogen with humans. And that's what we wanted to test with this study. So to test whether traded animals are more likely to share pathogen with humans, we use mammals as a model system for different reasons. The first one is that more than a quarter of all mammals are traded. We have very good data, temporal data on their trade thanks to the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. Mammals are also known to be a reservoir for human diseases, and they are better studied than all other animal groups, including for host pathogen association. So, focusing on mammals, we compiled data first on the wildlife trade in mammals using three databases. The CITES databases that compiles trade in CITES listed species in the last 50 years. The LEMIS database that's US imports in the last 20 years, but for all species, not only CITES listed species, so not only protected species. And the database of wildlife seizures that compiles illegal records of wildlife trade in the last 10 years. From these databases, we extracted for each mammal species whether they were included in trade or not, whether they were occurring in the trade in live animals, whether they were occurring in the illegal trade, and also the number of years they were found in trade in the last 40 years. I will come back to that later. Then we also compiled data on the pathogens of these mammals using the COVER database from the Verona Institute that basically records host pathogen association between mammals and virus, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and helminths. Using that data, we could know for each mammal species whether they were known to share at least one pathogen with humans and how many of such zoonotic pathogen they were known to carry. Okay, we also incorporated other variables in our analysis to control for potential confounding effects. First, including the synantropy, so whether mammal species were able to live inside or near human-modified environment, because this is a characteristic that can make the species both more likely to be traded and also more likely to share pathogen with humans. That's the same idea with wild meat, so whether species are used as food by humans, regardless of trade. We also accounted for research efforts because you can imagine that species that are better studied, we know better their pathogens, so we have to take into account this aspect. The biogeographical origin of a species and also phylogenetic non-independence, because it's not the same thing that comparing two ape species, an ape and a lion, for example. That also allows to control for phylogenetic distance to humans, which is an important predictor of pathogen sharing between animals and humans. Okay, then there's a lot of work of necessary to combine this database and then to clean them, filter out the species we don't want, such as domesticated species, for example, and then visualize the data and perform statistical analysis. But once we've done that, we can ask our question. And the first one is, are traded species more likely to share pathogen with humans than non-traded species? So here's a phylogenetic tree of all mammal species in our dataset. The branches are colored according to research efforts. So the darker, the more studied, and the lighter, the less studied. Then we can, for each species, we can map whether they're traded or not. So in dark, you are traded, and in white, you're not traded. Whether they're synanthropic or not, so living near humans or not. Whether they're consumed as wild meat or not. and whether they're zoonotic host or not, so whether they share at least one pathogen with humans or not. And if you look at raw data correlation between trade and zoonotic host status, what you see is that approximately 6% of not traded species are zoonotic, while this number is of 40% for traded species, so 8 times more. But like I said, we have to account for other variables before going to conclusions. So what we do is use a binomial mixed model to test whether traded species were more likely to be zoonotic hosts while accounting for all of these other variables that I described earlier. And what we found, and I will take my laser pointer if I can here, uh, or not, that's not a big deal. What we found is that even after accounting for synantropy, wild meat, and other variables, traded species are 1.5 times more likely to share at least one pathogen with humans than non-traded species. Okay, so then from here we add a little side quest because when you read about the link between the wildlife trade and the pathogen transmission and disease outbreaks, one thing that comes back often is that the trade in live animals and illegal trade channels are riskier are particularly riskier, particularly imported interfaces. And it's for good reason. First one for the live animal market is that live animal remain infectious longer than dead processed parts. And for the illegal trade is because by definition there's no hygiene protocols or veterinary inspections. So you expect these interfaces to promote pathogen transmission. So what we do is that we just added these two variables to our previous model and see if it improved our ability to predict zoonotic host status. And it did. So our model was better when we included whether species were traded alive or only as product or illegally or only legally. Although the effect of these variables are not stronger than the effect of trade itself. Okay, so from here, like we like have information on the whole trade, but it's only about sharing at least one pathogen with humans or not. It's not extremely precise, and we wanted to go a bit further because you don't actually expect only a species to give only one pathogen to humans. You expect that the more a species is traded, the more pathogens, different pathogen, it will have the opportunity to exchange with humans. And so our final hypothesis was that the longer a species had occurred in trade in recent history, the more pathogen it will share with humans. And to test this hypothesis, we had to rely on the only long-term wildlife trade data set that we had, which is the CITES trade database. So we compile like the last 40 years of trade in CITES listed species, Appendix 1 and 2. What you see here on the left is like almost 600 mammal species. So each line is a mammal species and each column is a year from 1980 to 2019. If you have if it's color with black, it means the species was traded on that year at least once. And if it's white, it means there was no trace of trade in that species for that year. And then we ordered by sum in row. So species on the top, the species that have been traded 40 out of 40 years, and species at the bottom, the species that have been traded only once in the last 40 years. Then we can map the number of pathogens that these species share with humans, and of course, our other covariates, synantropy, wild meat usage, illegal trade, and live market. And then, as before, we can do a model where we test whether the number of pathogens shared with humans is linked to the number of years spent in trade while accounting for all these potentially confounding factors. And what we find is, well, first that research effort was the main predictor of the number of pathogens shared with humans, which is highly expected and quite a good news. The more we study species, the more we know their pathogens. As before, we find that species that occur in the illegal trade and in live animal market share more pathogen with humans. And we confirm our hypothesis by showing that the time in trade is also positively correlated to the number of pathogens shared with human. And then I will show you this relationship in more details. So in X, in abscissa, you have the number of years a species has been found in the wildlife trade in the last 40 years. So it goes from 1 to 40. Each dot is a species. And in Y, on the vertical axis, you have the number of pathogens shared with human. And the relationship, the regression you see here is what the model estimates. And if you average the slope of this line, you can calculate that traded mammals share one additional pathogen with humans for every 10 years of trade, of presence in trade. Okay. So to wrap that up, what we show is that the wildlife trade is not only an interface for animal to human pathogen transmission, but might also be a key driver of this transmission. And that as trade continues, new pathogen will emerge from traded species. Uh, Another important consideration that doesn't it's not because the trade is legal that is safe in terms of pathogen transmission, and that's mostly because what makes the trade legal and illegal for now are mostly consideration links to extinction risks. One, I think, also important thing that we can conclude is that if we want to design regulation to reduce pathogen transmission risk, we should not only focus on species that we know carry dangerous pathogens, but on trade itself. And that could, for example, be by looking at cost and benefits and trying to balance them in order to limit the risk of pathogen transmission while not putting at risk people that strongly depend on the wildlife trade for their quality of life. Finally, and I will spend a bit more time on that, I think it's important to develop instruments for international cooperation regarding the regulation of the wildlife trade, such as the recently ratified WHO pandemic agreement. And why is that important? Because we need to design coordinated regulation because we are the only species that cares about political borders. So if you're in a state or in a country that does everything well regarding like limiting the risk of pathogen transmission or the other risk linked to wildlife trade, but that your neighbor is not doing the same, then the problem will come to your door, even like whatever you do. Our study has some important limitation. The two main ones are first that we can't really account for domestic wildlife markets that we know are important. We know that since a long time, but also particularly since COVID. And we can't account for that because we don't have data. We don't have internationally collected and regrouped data, and so that's also a call for efforts aiming at collecting, compiling, and making these data available. Of course, our study is also correlational, so we can't really we can't have a precise idea of the mechanism and the sequence of pathogen transmission that are responsible for what we observe, and that will only be possible using much more costly but precise tools such as genomics. And like I said, I will finish on that by asking this question: can we draw the bigger picture? But like I said, we can't really look at limiting risk in pathogen transmission and disease outbreak if we don't look at limiting the risk in other consequence of wildlife trade, because it's all related. And it's not only related in between the consequences of wildlife trade, but other factors are also affecting risk of disease outbreaks, either directly, as you can see here, but also indirectly by affecting, for example, species extinction risk or biological invasion. And so I think if we want to be able to really understand, predict, and prevent future potential pandemics, we need to map all that, map the potential driver, map the potential link, and then start looking at what we know, what we don't know, and maybe we'll find a way to prevent uh, the next pandemic. And with that, I thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Gippet, for such an excellent presentation. And I will remind our audience that please, if you have any questions or comments, you're all welcome to write them in the QA section. There is a button that says Q&A where you can add them. And also remind you that the recording of this webinar will be available on the Alliance website. And if you haven't used it yet, the translation services, please know that the QA session will be also translated simultaneously in French and Spanish if you need it. So you just need to click on the button of more, then on the figure of interpretation, the globe figure that says interpretation, and then select your favorite language. All right, so let's jump to the questions. Let me see. Okay, we have a question from Ernest Fotzing. It says, conservation nowadays is done on the ground, and many organizations are working on the ground, doing a lot of fieldwork. From this point of view, pathogens transmission will probably increase. What's your opinion?
First, hi, Ernest. We're working in the same department. um, well, this study is quite large. It's like from like very far distant from what's happening on the field. I totally agree with that. Um, I think there's a lot of people that are putting a lot of efforts on the field to collect data on like what are the disease content in the animals that interact with humans. And I think we need efforts to regroup information, this information together to be able to like know what's happening exactly. Um, I think these efforts are underway. I would say that Colin Carson, my colleague, will be way better at answering this. But uh, right now, there's like um, data flowing into, for example, NCBI, like genomic data that is being then reused, reflowed to inform databases that allows us to know in as much real time as possible what has been detected where, and I think that will be very important. In the end, I guess it will all comes back to funding and investing the little money and time we have in the good places. And so, if what we did here can help uh, put the money and time in the good place, so I would say on the field with the people that are actually producing the data, I think it's at least already something good that will be done here. I don't know if I'm
Yes.
answering the question, but
No, I think you did. Thank you. We have another question from Sarah Teman. Do you see some differences, risk, or trends depending on the pathogen type, whether it's virus or bacteria? And if yes, which pathogen would you say?
so it's not in the study, but that's one of the first thing I checked, like were there very big differences. Um, Bacteria and viruses are the two groups for which we have enough data to really compare. And I see basically the same kind of trends. Of
Mm.
course, there's more than just bacteria and viruses. Just in viruses, you have like many different like type of viruses and looking at um, the traits, like the links between like the link between the pathogens and the trade, depending on the type of pathogen we have, I think is a follow-up, clearly a follow-up on this. So I don't have the answer yet, but I know that if it's not me, it will be someone else doing it in the near future. Um,
Okay. Thank you. We have another question from Edgar Arturo Cuevas. He's asking which regulatory or surveillance measures have proven most effective in reducing this risk while minimizing negative impacts on communities that depend on wildlife resources.
mm, well, I'm not sure I'm competent to answer this question. My view from someone coming from invasion biology uh, is that the wildlife trade is mostly regulated, the international wildlife trade is mostly regulated for limiting species extinction by overexploitation. Then you can find regional, when I say regional, it's like, for example, European or North American or Australian regulation focusing on the risk of invasive species or introduction of species, but it's not even coordinated globally. And for pathogens, there's also few of such regulations. For example, the Lacey Act in the US limits the trade, the import in some species for some consideration linked to the risk of transmission of diseases. I'm not sure I've read strong cases on whether these regulations have managed to limit pathogen transmission risk, disease outbreak risk. I'm not sure it's easy to show either.
If I may to follow, but also thinking that for reducing opportunities for zoonotic spillover, then I mean, also based on your presentation, will require closer surveillance of wildlife trade in all its forms, legal and illegal, domestic and international. Um, so what would you say it's needed to improve? It's a problem of lack of data, or yeah, any recommendations for improving data sharing or generation and cooperation between countries in this regard?
Yeah. So I think first, if we show, like for example, here that some so trade is a problem in itself, so it creates opportunity for pathogen transmission. It shows in this large data. Then I think decomposing trade to identify which form of the very many forms it takes, which forms are the most linked to exchanges of pathogen between animal and humans, could help target more precisely where to sample, where to look at, and where to worry about. Right now, what we're showing is still quite large. I mean, if you want to target sampling efforts and monitoring efforts, we're still not there, totally there yet. I mean, it's good to show that this is one of the many human activity that promote pathogen transmission between animal and humans. But I doubt we have enough resources to look at everything related to trade at the same time. So for me, we still first need to go into more details in how different aspects of trade are linked to pathogen transmissions. And then, like I said at the end, also collect and compare data on domestic markets. Um, because they're also maybe one part of what we see is an indirect effect of domestic market, because you can expect domestic market to be correlated to international markets. Something that occurs on wildlife trade inside the country is more likely to be traded internationally too. So yeah, I think it's a first big step, but yeah, if we want to really target and prioritize our efforts, we need to go deeper into which trades are the most, which interface inside the trade are the priority.
Definitely. Thank you. We have another question from Virgin. Thank you for this great presentation. Have you looked into the importance of specific pathogen types and any insights about what about antimicrobial resistant pathogens?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's actually on been on the top of my mind. So I answered a bit about that earlier, but um, like I said at the end, I think there's a lot of interaction with other human activities because they like, for example, like domestic animal, they can the way we interact with them, it can interact with some form of wildlife trade. It can also it's also linked to pathogen transmission, not only between domesticated animals and humans, but also between domesticated animals and wildlife. And so that's I think that's a big mess of many things that we need to sort out and try to like characterize the links and then put it together, this big puzzle, put it together to be able to maybe have a general idea of what's going on and what is what are the most important interactions. So, for example, like the resistance to antibiotics might not develop directly in the wildlife trade, but it might develop in livestock, and maybe like wild animals that are the most in contact with livestock will like exchange pathogen with livestock, and then you can imagine how it can potentially complexify the picture. So I think that's super interesting. I'm still wondering how to assess that properly.
Nice. We have so many questions. We have around 10 minutes more, so it's okay. Let's try to address them. It says from Geraldine Coronado, thanks for your presentation. You have presented a study on a global scale. Have you identified any differences between regions?
So no, because we didn't focus so much on the spatial aspects in this study. I think yeah, our focus was more on the temporal aspect, and that was what was a bit new too. But yeah, of course, uh, it's also an interaction between uh, like temporal and spatial dynamics. And so yeah, that's also something for the future. I think there's also uh, already a lot of people that are working on these special aspects, and with the growth in the amount of data we have, um, we might start understanding things a bit better in the near future. Well, one thing that's um, linked to that is that what we show is not like it's important, but it's not very unexpected. And some people also ask us like, why was that not shown before? And the main reason that because the data on host pathogen association was not available uh, before, 10 years ago, this data was not available. 5 years ago, there was some good development to increase the size of this data set, such as the Clover data set. It's already a combination of four previous data sets. That's why it's called Clover, by the way. And so I think like with this data becoming available, we're starting to be able to disentangle things that well, it was not possible before. So I'm expecting spatial aspect to also be under strong scrutiny right now.
Yeah, actually, there was another question somehow related to that about the possibility of doing a network analysis on this type of data to perhaps determine possible country hotspots. Um,
Yeah, I think
do you think it's possible?
yeah, well, I think there's different ways of doing that. You can have data on, oh, we detected this pathogen in this species in that place. You can also um, like try to use a more like community ecology approach by looking at where are the species that are traded, regardless of the pathogen in the first time, where are occurring the species that are traded, and with that, you could expect that where you have more diversity of traded species, you will have potentially more diversity of potential pathogen emerging. This is made complicated by some very important aspect of wildlife trade, for example, captive breeding. So to limit extinction risk, one strategy is, or rather than to harvest the animals from wild population, you breed them in captive breeding operation, in farms and ranch, and you source them from these farms. And these farms were not necessarily located in the country of origin of a species, which is also an aspect that is important to take into account. And we could discuss about um, the implication of that for regarding pathogen transmission too. So yeah, I think there's two things. Like there's like having more data, uh, like very precise and concrete data on where the pathogens were detected in which species and where, and also looking at where the species are sourced from, because like there's plenty of this event of spillover that are like rare. Like you can screen the individuals of a given species for years without finding a pathogen, and at some point it jumps and creates a disease outbreak. And yeah, I think sometimes it's there's limitation also to the screenings.
Okay, very interesting. So many opportunities um, to work. Also, we have from Paula Cáceres a question about: Are you planning to make this data from your study publicly available? Maybe other researchers can use these data sets to develop their own models.
So all the data I'm using in the study, the raw data are openly available data first. And then
Mhm.
the data set that we are using the data set I use to produce all the figures and the model result that you've seen, it's all available in the supplementary and in a Zenodo repository, and that's something that's mandatory anyway. And so you can download the data, reproduce the analysis, and you can use it for looking at other aspects of the link between the wildlife trade and pathogen transmission.
Okay. There are a couple of questions also related of how countries or how organizations or other actors can help uh, to um, to improve surveillance and biosecurity systems, especially yeah for exported product animals, live animals or products, and minimize and or reduce health risk. Uh,
Well, okay. From my perspective of like the side of me that is a more data analyst, let's say.
mhm.
Um, I think I'm suspecting that there's plenty of information that's been being produced by governmental organization or like NGOs that is not necessarily available open for multiple reasons, and often by lack of fundings to pay people to make them like clean them and make them available and allow people to work with them. And so I think that would be a very first strong step. Um, I, for me, some obvious thing would be like, for example, having like veterinary detection, like a veterinary report being centralized, and countries to like coordinate in the way they store the data and arrange the data, so we can more easily combine this thing to have like early detection, or to have like a better idea of what's happening in general, like being able to exploit this kind of data. And I think right now it's, well, tell me if I'm wrong because I'm very interested in this kind of data, but I don't think there is a centralized global veterinary like, for example, Helminth's data database.
Well, then one thing is about yeah the veterinary services, the data, and we have well a question similar to what we have discussed slightly before, but it's also about the legal part. So it says, coming from Yusuf, thank you for this excellent presentation. Regarding legal trade, are current regulations sufficient to manage this health risk, or do we need to fundamentally reform these treaties? I think thank you. They are referring perhaps to CITES. You mentioned that it's currently more focused on extinction risk.
CITES is focused on extinction risk. Um, my perspective on that is that I think CITES is uh, um, doing a very good job at what it's doing. Like, if your goal is to protect species from extinction, well, I think what they try to do is actually the good way. The problem is that, like I showed, it's not the only potential consequences of a wildlife trade, and there is interactions. So, just concrete example. One way to protect species from overexploitation is to do captive breeding operations. And when you do captive breeding operations, you put a lot of individuals in the same place and you make them reproduce. And so you increase potentially the spread of pathogen in these captive populations and potentially also the number of contacts with humans and transmission risk. So my point is that for me, we have to decide what we want to limit, what risk we want to limit, and how to do that, and make sure that the decision we take for limiting one risk are not backfiring for limiting other risk. And so that's a yeah, that's a big puzzle that we need to sort out and not look only at the direct effect, but also at the indirect ones. And so my general question be yes, we need to consider something, not even reconsider, like, but just consider more things to design a more inclusive, holistic regulation, and I think that's what One Health is about.
Okay. For the sake of time, I'm gonna pick two more questions. We have many questions, which is great because it reflects that there is so much interest in this topic and curiosity. Okay, we have this question from Leonor Costa. It says, how do you view the zoonotic risk posed by wild species that are heavily managed by humans and regularly interact with domestic livestock? For example, buffalo-cattle interfaces are well-known reservoirs for diseases such as bovine tuberculosis and brucellosis. Some argue that because these wildlife populations are intensively monitored, tested, and managed alongside livestock, they may actually present lower spillover risk than less regulated wildlife trade chains, as you showed in the legal illegal portion. Does your framework account for this type of wildlife livestock human interface? And could intensive management reduce the pathogen transmission risk associated with traded wildlife?
Okay, that's a very long question. I will
The very long question. Let's say, if your study and your framework account for wildlife livestock human interface?
Yeah, so the answer is no. And that's also a bit linked to what I was saying before, is that we need to integrate like indirect effect or like other drivers that can interact with the wildlife trade or with pathogen transmission or with both. We took into account the most obvious ones that are like synanthropy, for example, or white meat usage. Um, we also, in one way, we took implicitly into account the phylogenetic distance between wild animals and livestock, using like these phylogenetic eigenvectors as covariates. But clearly, if we want to um, like understand like the interaction between these different drivers, these different forms of human activity, at some point we have to design studies that are explicitly addressing them, and our study does not. It's limited to this very direct link between wildlife trade and pathogen transmission. But I
Okay,
can answer
so
if you want.
yep. So a last question, and I'm not sure if you already mentioned it in the presentation. Why do your team choose to focus on your analysis on mammals, and which species are the most studied regarding diseases and pathogen spillover risk?
So mammals, the answer is quite straightforward. Like that's the group for which we actually have host pathogen association data for a lot of species. So there's more than 1,500 species for which we have host like pathogen informations. And I guess if we could like with the improvement of host pathogen database, we might be able to start looking at birds, for example. But globally, we are very limited by the amount of data on other groups, and so yeah. And of course, mammals we have data. They are also very often exchanging pathogen with humans. Like one of the group that um, because it's the closest. We are mammals. That's our closest relative. That's also a group that's particularly interesting in terms of pathogen exchanges. But yeah, I think clearly, like birds should be also a group that we should monitor and see if it follows the same rules as what we're showing on with mammals.
Okay, well, perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Gippet, for your time, for your generosity in sharing this knowledge. Thank you all, our audience. Please, as you can see in the screen, we have the Dr. Gippet emails and also the co-author of this study, Collie Carson, Dr. Collie Carson. So you may get in contact with them if you are interested in this to learn more about this study and related topics. And may I just share my screen, Jerome,
Yeah, I will.
please?
I'm sharing mine. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Um, so I'm gonna share mine. Just also to remind you that the Alliance, we plan to have regularly these type of webinars and other type of events. And please, if you have any questions or you would like to find out more about the Alliance, you can visit our website. There are two main ways to get involved. You may either subscribe to our mailing list to receive news and more updates about this kind of events, for example, or also you can become an Alliance member. Join us either as an individual or maybe your organization that you are currently affiliated can also request to be registered. And by being by joining as a member, you can access to resources and being connect and partner with other people who share similar interest. Also, we have working groups, so that's another way that you can um, explore pathways for collaboration. Thank you so much for your time. We're very happy to have you all here, and we wish you a nice day and evening.